There's an incredible piece of research in an article that also is written about it called More Risks Revealed for Antibiotic Exposure in Children. Now, this is of particular interest of mine simply because, one, I have 4 children, and I want to make sure that they have the best shot at life and make sure that their health is in the best way possible. And I'm never doing things to them that would ever hurt their health long term. Now, when I look back at my own life, I was probably on antibiotics about 15 years straight. I had chronic ear infections when I was a kid, probably even being put on antibiotics twice in 1 year. Now, when I look at a lot of the health problems that I deal with today, I guarantee you 100% that they are related to all the antibiotics I was on as a kid. Now, as we go through this, I will point out that I don't think that antibiotics are always bad. There are reasons that they are good. Antibiotics, though, shouldn't be handed out like Tic Tacs, okay? They do have extreme side effects, and we have to make sure that we understand that. You know, when we look at any medicine in general, there is always side effects to it. So that's why, as a natural doctor, I am very interested and very good at helping people overcome viruses and also bacterial infections and doing it naturally. So let's dive into this article right here. New study finds antibiotic use in children 2 and under linked to childhood onset of chronic illness, okay? And most of us who have an open mind, who are thinking critically, have to wonder why in the world in the United States do we have so many childhood illnesses? You can go to third world countries, you can go to small tribes, they do not have these problems. And we have quote unquote this amazing medical system. And here we are sitting with so many different childhood illnesses that it's devastating. Okay, so think about that as we go through this. Children 2 years old and under who take the antibiotics are at greater risk for childhood onset chronic disease such as asthma, allergies, obesity, and ADHD, according to a new study published in the Mayo Clinic Proceedings, okay? Now, these are all things that you do not have to look far at all to see children who are suffering from these issues. And here is the Mayo Clinic Proceedings. This is this article right here. You can go and look up the whole thing if you'd like. But let's get back to the article here. The study joins others that link antibiotic use and overuse with disease in young children, underscoring the need to weigh the prudent use of antibiotics against the harm they inflict on the gut microbiome early in life. The findings, based on work by researchers at Mayo Clinic and Rutgers University, support the hypothesis that trillions of symbiotic microorganisms living in and on the body that make up the microbiome shape the early development of immunity, metabolism, behavior, and other critical functions. And you know, when we look at these, first of all, we know that taking probiotics boosts your immune system, and we know that taking antibiotics, though it may wipe out a bacterial infection, it actually decreases your immune system. It also obviously wrecks your metabolism. The way that it actually alters behavior is in the way of altering brain function, because we know that your gut health and also that your microbiome actually has a huge input as to how your brain will function. Do you have a good mood? Do you have a bad mood? Do you have the inability to think correctly? I mean, do you have brain fog? I mean, look at all these kids walking around with ADHD. I mean, this is devastating stuff right here. And as I said, I was on antibiotics for probably 15 years of my life. And I've dealt with enormous amount of gut issues over my past probably 10 years. And I can link it all back to being on antibiotics. You know, I talk about this all the time because I help a lot of people overcome gut issues. And I tell my staff, like, this is why I believe so many people are having many, many health issues today, is too many antibiotics. Early antibiotic exposure and childhood health. Let's keep going through this. The population-based study covered all children born in Olmsted County, Minnesota from January 1st, 2003 to December 31st, 2011. It drew information on antibiotic prescription and analyzed the impact of antibiotic exposure on the risk of a few adverse health conditions. The researchers looked at 14,572 children, 70% of whom were prescribed at least one antibiotic in the first 2 years of life, mostly for respiratory or ear infections, okay? I was always on them for ear infections. Now, for instance, my son, if I took him in for the multiple respiratory illnesses that he has had in his early years, he would probably have already been on antibiotics multiple times, okay? And I think that antibiotics should be a last resort. They should not be a first go-to. I mean, how many people go to the doctor and they have a viral problem, a viral infection, and they get an antibiotic, right? It doesn't even make sense. However, these antibiotics are just handed out as if there's nothing but a net positive effect that they offer, when in fact we know that there's an enormous negative effect, and not only in children, in adults too. I recently had a person I was working with who went to their doctor after finding out they had H. pylori, and they got an antibiotic. It set off an inflammatory autoimmune storm in the body that has caused enormous problems ever since. From there, the doctors wanted to do steroids, they wanted to do Humira, and I'm like, look, this is a dangerous path you're going down. We have to make sure that we try to unwind the negative side effects you had from these and head in a good, healthy, natural direction. But geez, I mean, it's devastating things that can happen as a result of just taking an antibiotic. Back to the article, they concluded that early antibiotic exposure was connected with a greater risk of childhood onset asthma, allergy rhinitis, eczema, dermatitis, celiac disease, obesity, or being overweight. Okay, they've actually went and introduced different bacterial cultures to mice, and that's all they did to them. They literally just introduced bacterial cultures to them and they lost weight. They didn't change their diet at all. And so this is where, when you look at humans and the enormous amount of study that's going on right now in weight gain and weight loss, and that being associated with your microbiome health, it's incredibly fascinating. And then they go on to say, and ADHD, all influenced by the number, type, and timing of the antibiotic exposure. So this is truly devastating. And for all the parents who are watching this, as I mentioned, I have 4 kids, and you become really good at fighting off ear infections and viruses and anything that your children will get naturally when you're a natural doctor, and trying to avoid antibiotics. I mean, we see ear infections every year in my house. We see some sort of cough or flu or some other thing, and to this day, none of my kids have been on antibiotics. Now, like I said, it doesn't mean that you should never, ever, ever use one, because there are reasons that they're incredibly powerful. I mean, if you look back many, many years ago, I mean, children would die if they had extreme infections in nothing, in when they didn't even have antibiotics. So there has been a positive benefit to them. But as I mentioned before, they're used all too much. The risk climbed with more, I'm going to go back to the article, the risk climbed with more antibiotic courses when given earlier in life, particularly within the first 6 months. The subjects also had a higher likelihood of having a combination of diseases, especially when given multiple prescriptions, based on varied effects observed according to the antibiotic type. The study found that cephalosporin antibiotics were tied with the highest risk of multiple diseases, including autism and food allergies. Previous studies have observed that short-term or low-dose antibiotics therapy can permanently alter the gut microbiome. And this is an important piece right here, because it's believed that 1 round of antibiotics is enough to devastate your microbiome. Now back to the article, demonstrating that these commonly prescribed drugs shouldn't be deemed harmless, but instead should be used with caution, specifically in young children and pregnant women. In 2019, the study had concluded that administering antibiotics in the first year of life and through the subject's life was linked to development of asthma, allergy rhinitis, hay fever. Prenatal exposure to antibiotics throughout pregnancy was also associated with increased odds of atopic dermatitis within the first 18 months of life among children born by atopic mothers. The maternal use of antibiotics during pregnancy was also linked by a separate study to a higher risk of otitis media in their children, emphasizing the possible transmission of an unfriendly bacterial environment from the mother to child. Many people do not understand that concept, but the mother will give the child her microbiome. If the mother has a very unhealthy microbiome, the child will also have a very unhealthy microbiome. And this sets them up for all kinds of problems. And this even goes for children who are born through C-section versus children who are born through the natural birthing process, going through the birth canal. These children who are born C-section, they will not have the exposure to the healthy probiotics that is very good for them when they first start life. So that's another thing to consider. Now, when we look at all of this, there's a couple things that we have to look at as a parent or just anybody who's looking to improve their health naturally. One is that we have to make sure that we have the proper tools and we're armed with them in order to help fight bacterial infections, viral infections. We have to make sure that we know the proper herbs and things that you can use. And now the other thing that we have to really realize here too is that there is a negative side effect to antibiotics. Like I said, most parents just go along with their doctors. Their doctors say take them. The parents say no problem, and they take these antibiotics. And it doesn't matter whether it's a child under 2 years old. It doesn't matter if they're 10 years old, and it doesn't even matter if it's an adult. Taking antibiotics will forever alter the microbiome. And so beyond actually taking the antibiotics, it's important if you're in a position where you have to take them. Well, then what we have to do is we have to make sure we do everything we can to reseed the gut with the proper probiotics, okay? Very, very important concept. Growing up, I was on antibiotics forever, and I was never given proper probiotics. I was never given probiotics, period, until I learned about them later on in life. So what I'll do is below this video is I will go through some of the most popular antibacterials and antivirals that are natural that I use in my own home, and I will put them in the link in the description. I will also look for an immune booster that I use in my home that you can also use in order to help everybody in your household naturally stay healthy and stay off of a lot of these pharmaceuticals that have these negative consequences associated with them.